his best. I just can't really be that mad at him. But when I found this offense report that my lawyer presented to me, when I found this offense report, my thinking was all he had to do was present the pictures, the itemized listing, and prove to the jury at no time was this sheet of paper found at the scene. He never done that. He never done that. I didn't even know this existed until my lawyer presented and said, what you think about this? That's when I saw for the first time corroboration that the sheet of paper wasn't there. I've always asserted it. I just couldn't prove it until I finally got the offense report. And they laid down a real meticulous listing by the first responders and by Mr. Nita Smith, who was the CSI. They made itemized listing of everything they found in the car. Mr. C.J. Connolly of the Anthony Graves Foundation, he tracked her down, Danita Smith. She was the last one to scrub the car. He tracked her down in New York. And he asked her, how is it that an officer can come behind you and the other crew and find evidence that you missed? He asked her that, and I got it right here. And she responded. Said, I don't know how that's possible. But if any evidence was found, it has to be documented. It has to be initial. And if it doesn't have my initial, it wasn't there. That's how she answered it. So then we got with, well, not we, but one of the DNA expert, his name is Dr. Gunasekara. He got with Paul Motard. He was one of the guys who was the initial first responder. And he asked him would he pretty much come correct. Well, Mr. Motard said he's not going to say the officer lied, but he would stick by his itemized listing. So I asked my lawyer, why don't we just advance him to the hearing? And my lawyer felt that he's going to stick true to the blue code and might not prove to be a good witness because officers kind of look out for each other.
Okay.
I said, but we have his itemized listing. That's all we need.
Yeah.
And so that's why he didn't show up. But I think he's willing to come correct as well, Mr. Paul Motard.
Have you reached out to any, you mentioned the Anthony Graves Foundation. Have you reached out to any other organizations that do this, kind of work, that they see a case that they think a person may be innocent, and so they do research, et cetera? Have you reached out to any?
Yeah, I went to a lot of innocence projects, a lot. In fact, my lawyer, he was the former president of the Innocence Project. Gary Udashin was the former president of the Innocence Project. I went through TSU, U of H, when it was on in Lubbock, Texas. Now it's in Fort Worth, the Innocence Project. I went through all of it. I went outside the state, New York, trying to appeal to someone to look into this case. And the way it works is if one innocent network have your case, the others is kind of shut down. You got some kind of networking where they put your name in the computer, but so-and-so got it, so they're not going to do anything. But I think the most prominent was probably TSU, Thurgood Marshall School of Law. But when they found out I had an attorney, it kind of pushed them back. Even with the Anthony Graves Foundation. When they found out I had an attorney, they didn't want to go over his head. So they let them know we're available. If you need any research, anything done, we're here.
Do you still have that same attorney?
Yes, they have.
Okay. And what's his name again?
Gary Udashin, Udashen.
Okay. How are your spirits today and just in general, mentally, emotionally?
Well, I tell you, I couldn't have done this, of course, with God's help, but without the family support, my families have been just 1,000% behind me, encouraging me, praying for me, keeping me going. So there's a slight wear and tear, but naturally, I'm not a pain freak. I don't like what happened. Don't like being in prison, away from my family and loved ones. And I guess I was doing really well dealing with this until my mom's passed. And my mom's passed, that we've always played and joked about when I get out, I'm going to embrace, I'm going to take her out, blah, blah, blah. And then she passed away. That kind of magnified that I'm really restrained of my liberty. I can't even pay my last respects to my mom's.
When did she pass away?
October of 2020. Yeah, so it's that just kind of took all the fight out of me. I think my spirits are great. I do want to admit, if you study psychology, they got a thing called dissociative disorder. I think I went through a dissociative disorder. The first 3.5 years of my incarceration, it was like what happened to me happened to someone else, even though it was me.
Mm-hmm.
For 3.5 years, I didn't even acknowledge, I couldn't register that this was happening to me.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like somebody is going through this, but it wasn't me. But after about 3.5 years, when reality and that fantasy clashed, I cried like a little boy. And finally I said, you know what? Now I got to fight.
Mm-hmm.
I got to fight this.
Mm-hmm.
Crying is not going to help. I got to fight it. And I just never thought in my wildest imagination it would take these many years just to prove the truth. It's so simple.
I interviewed your brother months and months and months ago, and he said that he's in contact with you regularly.
Yeah, we talk often. He visits.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I read where before all this happened, you had 3 children.
Yeah.
Have you been able to maintain that relationship, and how is that?
Yeah, well, there was a gap at first,
Mm-hmm.
and thanks to the phones and the communication, so things are great with my kids. They were real young, of course, when this happened. My son was just 1 week old. 1 week.
1 week.
1 week old when all this happened. So again, every year, my thinking is, okay, they're gonna overturn this case. There's no way they're gonna let this thing linger. And this has been my thought every year, even now.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully the Court of Criminal Appeals will do the honorable thing and bring out truth and law and facts and establish a wrongful conviction.
What keeps you hopeful? Amid everything that's happened, amid, the decades that you've been incarcerated, why are you still hopeful? What is it?
Well, I tell you, I stumbled across this little secret. It's the power of imagination. If you can keep seeing it, then you can maintain your faith.
Mm-hmm.
When you stop seeing it, the faith is gone. So in my mind eye, in my vision, in my imagination, I never stopped seeing victory. I never stopped seeing the ultimate release that would come from wrongful imprisonment. So it's the power of the imagination that keeps me hopeful. I keep seeing in my mind's eye the celebration, the victory, and that really sharpens my faith. But as the scripture says, but there's no vision, the people perish.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it also applies to the individual. So vision, imagination is what keeps me going. And I just refuse to see anything else.
Okay.
I just refuse. So that kind of keeps me going. Then I'm a praying man. Spirituality helps, belief in God. But I just think when it's all said and done, there's no substitute for family. The family support it's really been my pillar.
Okay. I just have 3 more questions for you.
Yes, sir.
And appreciate your patience with me.
Oh, absolutely.
If and when people read this article or see this video and they are moved to want to do something to advocate for you, what can people do? How can folk help?
Well, they can appeal to Kim Ogg. Kim Ogg has the power to dismiss this whole case. She has the power to dismiss the indictment. Then there's no case. Miss Tammy Lane Campbell, again, she's a godsend. She was trying to appeal to Kim Ogg. Why don't you look into this case? There's something wrong with this case, and trying to appeal to her. But she wants the process to play out. But if they could appeal and reach the DA's office and highlight the injustice, and she has the power to correct, that would be extremely helpful.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think you can petition the courts because they are supposed to be impartial and indifferent. But Kim Ogg has the power to abort this whole case by dismissing the indictment.
Mm-hmm.
And she got the tools to investigate the case. It doesn't take much investigation to prove a wrongful conviction. So if they would do that, just see an injustice was done, and to correct the injustice, if they can appeal to the DA's office to investigate, they have an investigative team, then do the right thing and correct the wrong that was done. It's easy to do, and it's provable. This is not something we just conjuring up.
Right.
Everything is provable if she just look into it.
What were your thoughts when the George Floyd case made national and global news?
Well, I'll tell you, I was thrilled, really. I was thrilled to see the pushback, the outcry against injustice, the dissatisfaction reached the point where we want to bring about change. I was thrilled. George Floyd case, in my opinion, it had to happen. It had to happen. Just like Emmett Till, those things have to happen because it brings about such a change. George Floyd had international impact, where they focused in finally on the plight of Black America and the injustice we receive. I was glad to see that kind of attention. Well, unfortunately, he died in 9 minutes or so. Well, my George Floyd experience has been 38 years. I had a slow death, but the injustice that was highlighted benefited me because it shows that the system is very difficult for African American men. And the affliction of injustice is commonplace or more common than most people realize. George Floyd brought attention to it. And of course, since George Floyd, there's been others. But I was just glad to see the focus and the outcry for the people trying to correct this injustice.
And speaking on that, and this is my last question, unless another one pops into my head. You talk about the criminal justice system and its negative impact, especially on Black males. What reforms do you see need to take place for the criminal justice system to be more equal?
Well, maybe two things. I know this is real simple, but we really need the right people in the right positions to bring about the change. Kim Ogg is doing a great job in correcting some of the wrong injustices. She's not doing enough, in my opinion, but she is doing something. She's a break from the norm. If we can get the right people in the right positions, then change would occur. But if you got the same old good old boy network, same old scratch my back, I scratch yours, there will never be a change. So my thing is the power of the vote. If we can vote the bad ones out and bring the good ones in, that would bring about change. That's one thing that would change the system. Secondly, it's just my position, some kind of way, I think if they can just hold people liable, people who are in a position who is doing all this wrong, they can just hold them liable, but they fear that there will be consequences. I think they would do right if they fear doing wrong. To me, they do this wrong with impunity, thinking that nothing can happen. Like in my case, the DA ought to know that I'm not going to lay down on how you illegally use my own sheet of paper. But he didn't fear consequences back in the 80s because the good old boy system was so strong back then. And the police who lied, they didn't fear any consequences. If they feared consequences, they wouldn't do what they're doing. So I just think that there should be some checks and balances, some kind of way to